Welcome to the Easier Way to Sell presentation of Close the Deal Without Selling. Here's your host and developer of the Easier Way to Sell, Ike Krieger.
Hey there, this is Ike Krieger. Welcome back. Today's episode is going to be very helpful because it's going to offer you a checklist on how far you've come in your ability to take the yes formula out into the field or on the telephone and use it in your sales calls. Remember, until you've installed the yes formula as who you are as a communicator rather than something that you're doing to make a sale, you will not be as effective as you can be using this system. So go over the checklist, be honest with yourself, improve where necessary, and get ready to go out there and sell. Following that will be a take on the stages of learning. What exactly is necessary to get something to be who you are rather than something you're doing? Listen carefully and identify where you are in this process. And in wrapping up this episode, we're going to be discussing 6 steps for open-ended question success. I think you'll find it helpful, especially at this stage of the learning process. Okay, let's get started with the checklist. You'll recall that the public speaking model consists of 3 steps. Tell the listeners what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Let's take a look at what you've been told through the first 6 episodes, and then let's perform an appraisal of your readiness to employ the yes formula into your daily business practices. Let's approach this appraisal as you might any other project. Give yourself a check mark for completing each one of the preparatory tasks you've been assigned since episode 1. You'll know by the number of check marks if you're in a position to approach your next sales call armed with nothing but the yes formula and some note-taking material. Give yourself a check mark if you're clear on the Q stage of qualifying as covered in episode 6. You've memorized all the open-ended diagnostic questions you were assigned. Give yourself a check mark if you've created your own business-specific PSDS, present state, desired state, open-ended questions. You've memorized the prelude. You've decided which of the PSDS questions are most vital to remember. You're ready to write down those questions on your note-taking material so you don't have to remember. You're prepared to enter a sales interview with nothing but the yes formula and note-taking material. You're thinking like a doctor before, during, and after your sales call. You're able to remain curious, authentic, and neutral in your communications. You've become a powerful problem solver. You're aware of whose problem you're trying to solve. You're clear on your role as a navigator. You're prepared to conduct a diagnostic yes formula sales interview. Did you find a check mark in front of all these tasks? If so, congratulations. For those of you who still need to come up to speed on some of these assignments, I'd like you to go back over Pam's Yes Formula sales call in episode 5. I'd like you to identify each instance of her use of the above components on this list. To make sure you get a check mark on each one of those, I invite you to go to sellandmarketbetter.com and pick up your copy of the action guide. What we'll cover next is the process that all humans have to go through in order to really learn and install something, especially something like the yes formula, into their unconscious or their subconscious so it becomes something they're doing rather than something that they're thinking about. I'd like to take a few minutes and go over the 4 stages of learning. Understanding these 4 stages will help you become an even more effective communicator. The 4 stages of learning are unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. Now, what do those 4 steps mean in plain old English? The first one, unconscious incompetence, it basically breaks down to the fact that there are things you don't know that you don't know. You're unconsciously incompetent. I'll give a good example of this a little later. Second, there's conscious incompetence, where you know that you don't know how to do something or don't know certain information. 3 is conscious competence, and conscious competence is when you know how to do something, but you must still think about the steps that are necessary in order to be effective at that given task. And 4th, you have unconscious competence, which is basically the point at which you can do something effectively without really having to think about it. And a good example of these 4 stages of learning is driving an automobile. There was a time in your life when you didn't know that you didn't know how to drive an automobile. When you were a child, there was just a time when you had no idea that driving a car was of any great importance to you. However, one day it dawned on you that there were people getting around in these things called cars. And you were pretending to drive, but you knew that you didn't know how to drive a real automobile. You were consciously incompetent. Then there came that moment when you went through the learning stages of driving a car. For those of you for whom it's ancient history, think about the people you may have taught to drive a car over the last 5, 10, 15 years, and how uncomfortable it made you to be with them while they were going through the stages of conscious competence. They had to think about so many things while they were driving, it made us nervous. Many of us take driving a car for granted, but remember, there's a lot going on. In that stage of conscious competence, that's where you have to think about what it is you're doing in order to be effective. Finally, there's unconscious competence, which is the way most of us drive an automobile now. We drive along without thinking about it. As a matter of fact, driving a car is so deeply installed into our unconscious, many of us forget that we're driving and miss our exits, or realize we've not been aware of driving for the last 3 blocks and are deeply grateful and sometimes surprised that we haven't hit anything or anybody. So, those are the 4 stages of learning as they apply to driving an automobile. There was a time when you didn't know how to drive an automobile, when you were unconsciously incompetent. Then there was that moment that the awareness came when you knew you didn't know how to drive an automobile. You were consciously incompetent. Then there came the time when you could drive an automobile, but good Lord, you had to think about it. And it was then that you were consciously competent. And finally, you became unconsciously competent and you could drive, truly drive, without thinking about it. These stages pertain to almost every type of learning process you go through, especially with a system like the YES formula. Now, this communications reprogramming requires you to re-access a state of awareness in which you shift to consciously competent, where you have to think about using, for instance, the PSDS Openended Questions and other YES formula tools. But here's another step, one that's not usually thought of as part of the 4 stages of learning, and that's because I've added it. This 5th stage is wedged between conscious incompetence and conscious competence, and it's called conscious uncomfortable. Many of you, most of you, at one time or another are going to feel truly uncomfortable using this system. It's counterintuitive. It takes courage. It takes the guts to trust the fact that if you truly believe that this program is going to get you from where you are to where you want to be, to reduce the frustration and stress that go along with communicating with others, specifically in the sales process, there's going to be a time when this shift from what you were doing to what you would like to be doing is going to be uncomfortable. I invite you to stay strong, to install this information and sense memory into your unconscious. You're being tasked with making this system a new habit. Your goal is to make this language of success become part of who you are rather than just some new technique that you add to your already frustrating sales process. If you take on this communications model as a way of being effective in all parts of your life, your personal life, your business life, your social life, I can guarantee you'll start achieving your desired outcomes more often, more predictably, and in such a way that you'll have to keep yourself from giggling because you'll start to say to yourself, whoa, this really works. And you know how I know this? People keep coming back to me and saying, whoa, this really works. But in order for you to be effective, you have to stop doing what you've been doing unconsciously, which is the way you've been communicating and selling, and move back to conscious incompetence and say, I need to learn a whole different way, a way I really don't know. And as you move towards conscious competence, where you can do it but you have to think about it, you're on the road to unconscious competence. And there will be a time when you'll get through this and this system will be who you are rather than a procedure you're going through. Now, I want to tell you a quick story. I am one of only 2,000 registered craftsman piano technicians left in the United States. I'm a piano tuner. When I served my internship, it was one of the most frustrating exercises I ever went through because I just couldn't get the final little bit of how you tune a piano and keep it tuned. Tuning a piano isn't that hard. Keeping it tuned is. I went to my instructor and asked him, when will I be able to do it? And he said, you're thinking about what you're doing right now. The key is to be able to tune without thinking about it. And he said, and that won't happen until you've tuned 100 pianos. So I'm telling you right now, you need to go through, pick your own number, sales calls, thinking in terms of what Aristotle said. For those things that you have to learn before you can do them, you learn by doing them. And remember, you're going to find yourself going through that stage of uncomfortability, and I suggest to you that it will be worth it. The feeling of being uncomfortable, it's perfect. Take this learning process on, grow, be effective, have more fun, enjoy yourself. Use the YES formula. One of the pieces of my training material is called 6 Steps to Open-Ended Question Success. Open-ended questions help organize the problem for all parties and offer an opportunity to find a solution. When you ask the right questions, you cause others to think more clearly. So here are those 6 steps that help you and your prospects think more clearly. 1. Know your outcome. 2. Formulate your open-ended questions. 3. Interview your client. 4. Listen to the answers. 5. Probe further if necessary. 6. Take action or respectfully withdraw. Remember, you're developing a new habit, the habit of open-ended questions. New habits take practice because your old habit is making statements and asking yes or no questions. You need to retrain your responses. you need to create a new habit of asking open-ended questions. Now, closed-ended questions can still be effective in an established relationship, but for the purposes of your selling effectiveness, open-ended questions are the key. This new habit may take up to 14 to 21 days to establish, so begin to pay attention to your communication style for 1 week. Notice how you start conversations. Notice how you talk to people at work. Notice how you talk with people at home. Notice how you respond to questions. The next time you're about to lecture someone or make a statement, stop yourself, count to 3, and ask an open-ended question instead. Good questions establish rapport, give the other person a sense that you care, and help you make your point without giving out non-essential information. A rule of human communication is most people prefer talking to listening. So when you ask a question, you give a person the opportunity to talk. The impulse to answer a question is automatic. He or she knows that they are expected to do more than listen. Now, it's better to know some of the questions than all of the answers. That was written by a fellow Ohio State Buckeye, James Thurber. But we're talking about OEQ, not OSU. Okay, that'll do it for this episode, and the good news is that with each of these episodes, you're that much closer to using the YES formula in your business and in your life. Now, over the upcoming episodes, specifically the next 3, we're going to go over every detail of the YES formula and the easier way to sell in a sales-related conversation. And if you have your copy of your action guide, be sure to follow along. So fasten your seatbelts and listen to the next episode. This is Krieger. See you next time.